Ricky, I started out with a hot take this morning. I kind of don't know where you're at with it. I said, in my opinion, Auburn is the most explosive, the most capable of maybe blowing an opponent's doors off. Florida has the most versatility. Duke is the most complete, but Houston understands and embraces their identity the best. Fair, foul, somewhere in the middle, too simplistic.
Yeah, I like that for sure. And there's no question about Houston just having such a solidified team identity. It seems like every Kelvin Sampson team plays the exact same way. I do think there's a case that this could be his best team with the Cougars yet. Obviously, they made the Final Four in 2021 with Quentin Grimes, who's become a really good NBA player lately. But this Houston team's got talent too. And the thing that jumps out to me is like, yes, Houston's number one in defense again. Yes, they're going to play at a very slow tempo again, but they actually have shooters this time. They're nearly 40% from three as a team. I think the perimeter trio of Manuel Sharp, Milos Uzan, and LJ Cryer is just very solid for them. And then the bigs are just outstanding defensively. JoJo Tugler is incredible with his length. I feel like Juwan Roberts, you just can't move that guy in the paint. He just takes up so much room inside. So I like that the entirety of that comparison. And yeah, Houston's identity is ironclad. I can't wait to see them against Duke. Number one defense versus number one offense. That's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I felt like, and I started with Duke in Houston, and it's not because I picked Houston to win it, but I love the interior matchup primarily because what you said. The, Flagg will have his hands full because he almost has an athletic peer and somebody almost that loves to run and can rim protect that will guard him. They can switch 1 through 5, they can switch 1 through 4. Houston interior is just busy. I like the fact that they're good with their mid-range game too. Which one of those things will manifest itself first if Houston's going to be able to pull the upset? The mid-range
Yeah,
game
so
or their interior presence and how they can guard?
yeah, I definitely think the interior presence is going to be huge. What's interesting to me when I watch Houston is that they hedge ball screens more aggressively than just about any team you're ever going to see.
They're like 30 feet from the hoop.
Exactly. And like Braden Smith at Purdue was able to handle that. He might be the best point guard in the country. So low to the ground, such a skilled ball handler. Okay, Duke doesn't really have that like next level point guard. Like they give their playmaking to Flagg, to Con Knipple, sometimes Proctor, but Proctor's really at his best as a spot up shooter. So like how are Flagg and Knipple going to handle these super aggressive ball screen coverages from Houston coming at you with length and athleticism? They've never seen that before in their careers. They're going to get it in the biggest game of their life in the Final Four. I think that's going to be such a good window into both Flagg and Knipple, and to see like can the way to beat that is just to rotate the ball, make enough passes to hit the shooters in the corner. Purdue was able to do that a bit because Braden Smith was so good, but I'm interested to see if Flagg and Knipple are up to that. And then I think for Malawak, it's an interesting test too, because how many guys actually have the length to match Malawak on the inside? It's basically no one. But JoJo Tugler is like a 7'6" wingspan or something. He's not 7'2" the way Malawak is, but his arms go forever. He can jump out of the gym. So I think that's going to be a fascinating interior matchup too. Can Malawak score from the mid range? Can he do something more than flush home alley oops? I honestly think he has more to his game than Duke has let him shown this year. But his role has been very defined, and obviously it's been successful with this two-man game partnership with Knipple and Flagg. So that interior matchup is going to be really fun, and can't wait to see how the Duke freshmen handle that ball pressure from Houston.
Ricky, were you surprised at all that Duke opened up as a 4.5 point favorite? Like talking to DB earlier and to you now, like it feels like that matchup is pretty intriguing, and I would anticipate it being a very close game. Like I was a little surprised that the number was so big early.
Not surprised, just because I feel like Duke's best game is much better than anyone else's best game left in this field, and that's why I've consistently picked them to win the tournament since before the bracket. And as I've been ranking the teams each round, I always put Duke number one. I just feel like if they play their best game, their level is higher than anyone else's. And we've seen Duke win the national championship with freshmen before. I was in the gym in 2015 when Julio Okafor, Tyus Jones, Justice Winslow, and Grayson Allen led them to the national title. I feel like this group of freshmen is probably better, honestly. Flagg is just like such a next level prospect. I think Malawak's incredible, and Knipple is really the forgotten guy. Like he's so overqualified as a third option. Absolutely elite shooter. The guy never misses a free throw. and can just, run pick and roll too, hit Malawak on these lobs. Really interesting team. I think Duke's the best team in the country. So I think Houston can beat them for sure. But if Duke plays its best game, no one's touching them. So I think the line makes sense. Now the question is, can Houston drag them into the mud, make this an ugly game, and, prevent Duke from getting to that highest level?
Two things in that. Knippel's footwork is incredible, how he cheats and beats angles. He's a crafty ball handler. And he always makes like those winning plays. I agree with you. I probably would have leaned more towards Sion James as the underrated, unheralded guy, because Knippel does get some run, but I agree, especially as not an elite level ball handler. He finds this weird way, Knippel does, to take pressure off of not having an elite level point guard.
Yeah, he's so beefy, right? He's like 6'7", 220, 225.
He's a big guy, yeah.
I would say he's not exactly an elite run and jump athlete by any stretch, but it's still hard to get around him.
Yeah, he's crafty.
He's crafty, like you said. Yeah, he's got pretty good ball handling ability for a 6'7", 18-year-old or whatever he is. And, man, to have Sion James and Proctor as your fourth and fifth options, that's how you know your team's loaded, because those guys are getting starting roles. For most teams, and at Duke, they're the fourth and fifth guys, and they got good guys coming off the bench. So, yeah, really like Knippel. To me, he's a lottery pick in the NBA, obviously. And Malawak, I would take as high as 3, I think, in the NBA. He's really enticing long-term to me, at least.
I love Malawak.
So we'll see what Duke could do, but they definitely got the horses, that's for sure.
I was trying to make the case this morning for as much love, and, Ricky, this is a guy that was loving Florida in January, especially after they beat Carolina, and they weren't even healthy yet. I'll make the case. Are you buying it that for what people think they are, as versatile as they are, as flexible as they are, that of the 4, they've played the worst basketball in the total number of minutes they've played relative to what they're capable of? Are you buying that discussion?
Yeah, I'm buying that, because coming out of the SEC tournament, it's like, wow, no one's going to touch this team. They just looked unstoppable in the SEC tournament. And then they were on the ropes against a very mediocre UConn team, needed Walter Clayton Jr. to save them with multiple daggers at the end of the game. Same thing happened with Texas Tech. They absolutely should have lost.
Right, they're kicking themselves over that, Gimme. Wow.
But, March comes down to guards, as you guys know, and Florida's got the best guard in the field. Walter Clayton Jr. is incredible. How did this guy only end up at Iona? I know it was Rick Pitino back in the day, but he is just a total stud. His combination of size, shot making, poise, just unbelievable. That shot he hit against Texas Tech, where he was in the paint, he dribbled it back out and just hit a fadeaway 3. I'm like, what? This March Madness forever hero type stuff from Walter Clayton. So, and then, am I pronouncing this right? Thomas Howe is the other guy who. He was really good. Florida's just got so many weapons. This dude, Thomas,
and where he come? He had led him in scoring all year.
6'9" athletic sophomore, though, and he's skilled and, 35% three-point shooter. He's going to be an NBA player, too, I would say. So Florida's just got guys. They have Clayton, Elijah Martin, and Will Richard as your guards, and then amazing front court depth. That's a pretty damn good formula. And you got to credit Todd Golden, because there's been a couple times where I'm like, oh, Florida's going to lose this game to the coaching. And they pulled it out every time. So they haven't played their best game yet in March. Yet they're in the Final Four. Seems like a good sign. I think they're going to beat Auburn, but I don't feel confident in it. I think that's going to be an amazing game. And, we'll see how healthy Broome is after he kind of got hurt at the end of the Elite Eight game there.
Now, so Auburn is the team that, when they're going, they're kind of wow. And they're familiar with Florida, obviously. Why do you think, or what happened, Ricky, where I get losing the 3 of the last 4, but it seemed like the last quarter of the season, we kind of fell out of love with Auburn. And even Pearl was like, well, look at who we've lost to. These are good teams. And even going into this tournament, they weren't as disrespected as Houston. A lot of people liked Auburn. But for a while there, when they were going, a lot of people thought that they were the best team in college basketball.
Yeah, Auburn, obviously they're phenomenal. Johni Broome is so good as an interior scorer. I almost think sometimes they're a little too reliant on Broome. You saw it in the Sweet 16 matchup a bit against Michigan when he couldn't overpower their front line. I was like, all right, guys, like, you got other weapons here. You can't just pound the ball into Broome in the post. Obviously, against Michigan State, their bigs are pretty mediocre. Broome was able to go through them like air. He had an incredible game to push them into the Final Four. But what makes Auburn interesting to me is just like the variety of weapons they have.
Yeah.
Tahad Pettiford gives me Kemba Walker vibes at times with his ability to create space off the dribble, splash shots. He's so dynamic as a freshman guard. Then you got the two wings, Miles Kelly and Chad Baker-Mazara. To me, when Auburn's playing its best game, the wings are sort of the barometer of that. They are knocking down shots, stretching the floor, and being disruptive defensively with their length. You know that Cardwell is going to give you elite interior defense.
Yeah.
Chaney Johnson's a great glue guy. I feel like it comes down to Kelly and Chad Baker-Mazara knocking down shots, and then, Denver Jones or Pettiford have to be on too. So Auburn just has a lot of different ways they can beat you. It's easy to fall back on, okay, let's pound it into Broome in the post because Broome's one of our best players, but their offense is more dynamic than that when they're at their best. And, I think they're going to need everyone to step up to beat Florida. And what a great game that's going to be.
I hate to just bottom line it as toughness, but if Auburn goes back and looks at the I don't know, whatever it was, 90-81 loss to Florida a few weeks ago, I think the presence in the paint, Florida has more versatility because they have so many bigs that they can run out there, but is there a toughness component? I mean, you talked about the wings. Baker-Mazara, he's kind of a bully, a little bit of a bad boy. And I get Florida has Martin. It seems like Auburn has more of those guys. With a team that likes to play with so much pace, could that even be a thing?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Florida's bigs are great, but they're not overpowering. They're kind of like finesse bigs in a sense. So, I mean, Auburn can just put you in the basket. Cardwell is incredible in terms of his defensive interior rim protection. And Johni Broome is just a throwback 90s NBA power forward who's going to hit you with shoulders and create space that way. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Carlos Boozer or someone like that from 20 years ago. I feel like he just has a throwback game, but is also a great passer and has some skill in some unique ways. So, yeah, Auburn definitely seems like the tougher team. They're just bigger and stronger inside than Florida. Pettiford, I think at his best, Pettiford can match Clayton shot for shot. Going to be a fascinating game. It seemed like Auburn just flipped the switch in the second half against Michigan.
Yeah, their spurt ability is incredible because of their pace. It looks frenetic.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that since that happened, it feels like they've been on top of their game since that comeback against Michigan in the Sweet 16. So we'll see. I mean, two great teams. This Final Four just delivered. We didn't get the Cinderellas this year, but we're left with the four best teams. It's going to be really fun to watch.
I have to take advantage of your expertise. A little off the grid on the national level as we talk coaches. It's 2025, and West Virginia and Virginia, two of the last teams to fill their vacancies. Just the lack of the cost of doing business, or when you look at the landscape of college basketball, just not surprised.
Yeah, Virginia hired the VCU coach, right?
Yeah.
Brian
Odom. Yep.
Then I don't know what's up with West Virginia. You stumped me on that one.
Well, they went internal with, and I can't remember his name. It's his second year guy at West Virginia, but it's just
Ross Hodge.
Hodge, yeah.
Hodge.
They've always been better programs, but they were so late in the game. And I get DeVries didn't leave until, a couple of weeks ago, but the land it shifted right before our very eyes, right? Remember, those used to be really good jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm fascinated to see, Tony Bennett retired for a reason at Virginia, right? It's because he didn't think he'd get the NIL money, and he didn't think he could be able to play the transfer portal game at Virginia, when he was so good building up those teams 5-6 years ago. So can Odom do that? Is he going to get more NIL money than Bennett had? Why wouldn't the donors step up for a legend like Tony Bennett in that sense if it's going to happen a couple of years later? So very interested in Virginia. I mean, Virginia should be a top 4 program in the ACC every year with Duke, Carolina, probably Louisville there too. But, when they're down, the ACC's down, it feels like. So very interested to see what the future of Virginia looks like.
Yeah, I do wonder about Tony Bennett in Virginia because
maybe stylistically they didn't want to invest.
Yeah, well, I also wonder how much of it was the donors didn't want to invest in him, or he just didn't want to coach basketball that way. Because I do think there's two sides to that
And on
coin,
his way
right?
out the door, it didn't seem like he wanted to coach basketball that way.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, maybe the donors were in, and he just didn't want to play the game.
For sure. Yeah, but 55 years old, walking away. Obviously, it's been a trend we've seen with a lot of these coaches. And yet, here's Rick Barnes and Tom Izzo. I think, Barnes is 70. I think Izzo's around 70. And both those guys still, grinding away in the Elite Eight. It is a tough time to be a coach in college, but, the money's pretty good. So we're not going to complain too much more.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
I think I heard somebody say anytime you got 2 commas in your salary, you're doing okay. Yeah. No, so I speaking of coaches here, we were talking earlier about obviously the Kevin Willard situation going from Maryland to Villanova, and not in the classiest of manners, I guess would be a nice way to put it. I wonder, though, how good of a job leaving Maryland, how good of a job do you view Villanova as? Because we couldn't really land on what we thought about the Villanova job.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have no idea. It's so hard to follow Jay Wright, obviously. So Kyle Neptune, had a tough gig from the moment he got there. They actually had some pretty decent players this year at Villanova, but their defense was just terrible the whole year, and they could just never put it together. Too many bad losses early in the season. So I think you're right. Is Villanova even a better job than Maryland? Is a really interesting question. Would you rather be in the Big Ten or the Big East? I guess Villanova, with this revenue sharing coming up, doesn't have to split their money with football. And I'm not 100% sure on how the revenue sharing is going to affect all these programs in terms of the NIL money at their disposal. But not having to split it with football seems pretty appealing to me. So I wonder if that played a role in Willard's part. And Willard certainly cashed in at the right time, right? Classic riding a hot March Madness run into a different job. So, we'll see how it works out. I'm not super confident that Villanova is a better job than Maryland at this stage, but we'll see.
Let's go to the Big Ten before I get to Patino's squared in the Big East. Who landed, in your opinion, the better coach given the school? DeVries at Indiana or McCollum at Iowa?
Yeah, I like McCollum. I'm really intrigued by McCollum. I mean, his success track record at the D2 level speaks for itself. The fact that he was able to just take Bennett Sturts and turn him into, potentially a first-round pick is really just fascinating at Drake. And to me, it just comes down to Sturts. Sturts is so good. He's going to be one of the best returning guards in college hoops next year. Mm-hmm. But honestly, he should get looks at the NBA, especially if the NIL money is keeping a lot of the other veterans in college hoops. Somebody like Sturts, late first, early second round pick, I think he deserves consideration at that level. If he comes back to Iowa, I like McCollum and Sturts better than anything DeVries can do.
I got to see him play 39, 40 minutes in the Big Ten, though. His elite level stamina for what he did at Drake was, they talk about two-way guys in football. He was incredible.
He played 98.8% of the available minutes this year. Bennett Sturts, for Drake, that's crazy. He never came off the floor the entire season. But I'm totally sold on Sturts. I don't know. He doesn't look like he's 6'4" out there, but he's pretty athletic too. I hate to say sneaky athletic. But he had more dunks. He had more dunks than Dylan Harper this year. He was just the number 2 pick in the draft. So, yeah, I'm a believer in Sturts. I think McCollum just knows how to push the right buttons. Indiana should always be better than Iowa at basketball. Yeah. That should not even be a debate. But Indiana is such a low-key tough job with the pressure from the fans and the alumni and donor base. It just seems like Indiana has a suffocating amount of pressure, where I think McCollum he'll be able to be fresh and loose in Iowa, especially if he gets Sturts back. So going to be really interesting. Indiana should be better, but, I like the McCollum hire for Iowa for sure.
Ricky, I want to bring the coaching discussion back around to the Final Four, because you said something interesting about Golden at Florida, and there's a couple times you're like, they might lose this game because of him. I'm curious. We've kind of got a strange mix of coaches in the Final Four here. Obviously, you got sort of the old guard with Kelvin Sampson and Bruce Pearl, and then you've got a highly successful but pretty inexperienced guy in Shire, and then you've got Golden, who has put together some really good teams at Florida. Is there a guy you think is clearly either the biggest asset or biggest liability out of those 4 coaches?
No, I think 4 great coaches. Obviously, like if you're ranking the coaches, you probably got to go Kelvin Sampson number 1. Just because like he just does more with less at Houston. The way he's been able to turn Houston into a power program has been unreal. 6 straight years of making the second weekend, back in the Final Four, for the second time with Houston now. But all these coaches are really good. I mean, Golden and Shire are both in their 30s, so their story is just being written. For Shire to get to the Final Four in his 3rd year at Duke, pretty incredible. I think that Duke has been just a clear winner of the NIL era. Like they've just been able to hit the ground running in terms of getting the best players from the Nike circuit every year. And then Auburn, like their team's just so old. So Bruce Pearl is like he's rolling out a bunch of 24 and 25-year-olds. I mean, they're older than a third of the NBA team. It feels like it. So definitely amazing coaching matchup. I would say Kelvin Sampson, you got to put him atop your coaching rankings, but these young guys, their story's still being written. So anything could happen in this Final Four.
Let me ask you about a sneaky one. I go back to the Big Ten because he gets a lot of credit for his offensive prowess and how they like to play. What about Nedved in Minnesota? Minnesota seems like one of those jobs that should be better, especially with the AAU circuit and the talent in the state. Do you like that hire?
I do like it. I just think Minnesota's a really tough job in the Big Ten. Yeah, I mean, Minnesota basketball, not a ton of history. Same thing with football. Like, men's basketball and football is always going to be tough at Minnesota. But, I mean, they hired the best possible guy they could have hired, in my opinion. Medved went to Minnesota. He has basically been building his reputation as an elite mid-major coach the last few years. He's putting guys in the NBA every year at Colorado State. Like, how does that happen? From David Roddy to Isaiah Stevens. Nee Clifford should be a first-round pick this year. He's unbelievable. So, just the fact that Medved has been able to turn Colorado State into a program that can develop and get elite talent, and he's making the tournament every year, really should have been in the Sweet 16 this season, if not for that Queen buzzer beater in the round of 32 for Maryland. So I think that was a great hire for Minnesota. But when it comes to Minnesota basketball, it's I'll believe it when I see it, because the Big Ten, while it doesn't have the one overwhelming team in the conference, like Duke in the ACC or some of these other UConn in the Big East, the level of play in the Big Ten is just so high consistently every year. So just making the tournament is going to be so difficult because half the league, or more than half the league, is tournament caliber. I think Medved was a perfect hire, but it's tough. It's a tough gig at Minnesota, and we'll see if he can pull it off.
Ricky, before we let you go here, did want to ask you, I know DB brought up the Patinos and now being in the same conference.
Thank you.
What did you think about that hire of Richard Pitino? Speaking of a guy that had been at Minnesota and maybe wasn't as good as people were expecting or hoping that he would be, but had a great run in New Mexico. What do you think about that hire to Xavier?
Yeah, I like that. I thought that he did an incredible job at New Mexico. Having JT Toppin and Donovan Dent on the same team for a year in New Mexico is totally incredible. So I know it didn't go amazing for Pitino at Minnesota. I still think he's got upside. As a coach, he's probably in his early 40s, I would guess, so he's got plenty of good years ahead of him. And Xavier is just a consistently very good program. It feels like Xavier's, in the mix to make the tournament every year. The question with Xavier is always the ceiling. Like they got a high floor as a program, but how much can you really win at Xavier? Obviously, Sean Miller thought, Texas has a higher ceiling. That makes sense. So he makes the jump to go there. But I thought Pitino was a really good hire, after you lose Sean Miller for the second time at Xavier. I think Pitino should be able to keep that program rolling, but, you just wonder, what's the upside of that type of program?
Ricky, let me get you out of this. This is the last one for me. We debated this. That poll came out probably, I don't know if it was Bleacher Report. This is right before COVID, and they were ranking jobs. And Texas was in the top 10. I've never forgot about how coaches felt about Texas as a basketball job. Obviously, Miller in Texas. For you, is that a good basketball job?
Yeah, I think so. Texas always viewed as a sleeping giant. I think the nice thing about Texas is
seems to get a lot of guys fired.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. But such a strong recruiting base. Yeah, expectations are always going to be high. Consistently really good, though. They're always landing McDonald's All-Americans every year. They're always going to have money to spend in the transfer portal. And then Texas football gets all the attention and is really what people care about. So, you're a little bit out of the spotlight, kind of like Dusty May is at Michigan, where there's not quite as much pressure on you. But you're right that it does seem like Texas turns over coaches quite a bit. And, you can always get fired. I think Texas thought Chris Beard would be there forever, and they had to move on from him. So Sean Miller, in Arizona, he was just recruiting so well, getting like Aaron Gordon, Stanley Johnson. Like those were like elite level guys back in the day. And I think he made the Elite Eight 3 times off the top of my head. I know he never made the Final Four, but he was consistently making deep runs in the tournament. So I like that hire, but again, like the revenue sharing is going to throw a big wrench into this. Like how much money does Texas basketball have if they got to split the pot with Texas football, and football is going to, get more of the attention and more of the money. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing coming up. But in general, Texas sleeping giant. I believe they have a newer stadium there too, so they definitely got good resources. We'll see what Sean Miller can do. He's gonna that's as good of a job as you can ask for, in my opinion, if you're Sean Miller, trying to get back to the mountaintop after the Arizona exit. So we'll see.
That's Ricky O'Donnell, SB Nation
Way
writer
good,
and
Ricky.
editor.
Way good.
Great stuff. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.